In June of 2018, this picture broke the internet, where it was claimed that an Igbo man in Nigeria by the name of Azubike buried his father in a brand new BMW worth 32 million naira. In the picture, you could see a group of undertakers trying to lay this new vehicle into a dug grave. And when the story hit the social media, it was met with instant backlash. According to the story, Azubike wanted to buy his father a car. It was his father's dream to have a car, and his father never had one while he was alive. After many years of struggling, Azubike eventually got his father a brand new car. But before he could bring the car home for Christmas, his father had passed. And so, rather than just leaving the car back in the city, he decided to use the car as a burial casket for his late father. That was what the story was saying. And whereas this should have been a good thing in a way, nobody liked it. In fact, a lot of people went as far as calling Azubike foolish, calling him stupid. Even people who are from Anambra, Hiala, where this story was claimed to have happened, denied it ever happened. Many Igbo people came out and said, this don't happen in their culture. More so, a lot of Nigerians spoke out that this is unlike Nigerians. We don't bury people in vehicles. Or do we? The truth of the matter is, we have a lot of strange burial practices in Africa, and burying people in a car is really one of them, as hard as it may seem for you to believe. But the truth about Azubike burying his father in a brand new 32 million naira BMW is that it's not true. Yeah, that is the truth about that story. It's not true. It was later debunked by actors and actresses and people who were on the set of a particular movie that that photo was taken from a scene during production, and that it wasn't real. It was for a movie named Social Club, which I don't think is on the internet anymore. But before these fact checkers could come and debunk the story, a lot of people have already gone with it. A lot of people have written with the story. In fact, this story went on so many international blogs that up to now, I think some people don't know that it's not real, and that that picture was taken from a movie set. And there was maybe nobody like Azubike whose father wanted to get buried in a vehicle. Or was there? Well, it turned out that in as much as Azubike's story for burying his father in a vehicle did not happen, there have been cases in Nigeria, Africa, and across the world where individuals were buried in a vehicle. And in this video, we are going to look at some of those stories where someone was buried in their favorite car or in a vehicle. Starting off in Ghana, in 2023, a businessman named Norbert Atodio buried his father, Asoki Atodio, in a Toyota Corolla as a coffin. We know Ghana has fantasy coffin where they make realistic objects out of wood for a casket for burial. That we've talked about. However, in this case of Asoki Atodio, rather than being buried in a fantasy coffin shaped in the form of a vehicle, his son, Norbert, buried him in an actual vehicle. The burial was said to have taken place in a private cemetery in the Upper East region of Ghana around the end of May in 2023. According to sources, Norbert's decision to bury his father in a vehicle was due to the fact that his father really had so much love for that particular car. The car was said to be his father's most prized possession. And it was also said that his father, before passing, expressed his desires to be buried in his vehicle. When Norbert's idea to bury his father in this Toyota Corolla became public, environmental specialist, in fact, the government told him not to do so. But he went ahead to do it. It's a private cemetery. After he was done, he cemented the entire gravesite and went into hiding because they began looking for him. Now, let's go to South Africa, where a man named Chief Chekede Pitso, who was a traditional ruler in the Eastern Cape, instructed his children to bury him in his second-hand 1990s Mercedes-Benz E500 after he passes. It was said that Chief Pitso loved this vehicle so much, despite the fact that it was second-hand. It was one of his favorite places to be in his house. Ironically, given the fact that the car was not part of his house. To him, this vehicle felt like a dragon from Game of Thrones, which he really loved so much. And just like a character from the House of the Dragon, where she needed to get to the dragon to take a ride one more time before she dies, Chief Pitso had a similar scenario, where it was said he died on his way walking to his vehicle because he knew he was going to die and he wanted to take one last ride in that Mercedes. Only problem was the Mercedes had stopped working 2 years before he died. But just because the car wasn't functioning as much didn't mean this man liked it any less. In fact, still after the car stopped working, it was still his favorite place to be. that he would walk to this vehicle, sit on it, and listen to the radio. And that was what he did for the rest of the 2 years that the car stopped moving. And on the day he died in 2020, he was taking a walk to his vehicle, trying to get to the front seat to listen to the radio, when all of a sudden he collapsed and died of old age at the age of 72. And prior to his death, he had already instructed his children that they should bury him in that vehicle because he loved it so much. And after his death, his children granted him his wishes. On the day of the burial, his children dressed him in his favorite suit, put him in the front seat of the vehicle, the driver's seat. He was belted up and had his hands on the steering while they dug a massive grave to accommodate this vehicle. Unlike the regular 6 feet, it was said this grave was about 8 feet and very wide enough to fit the messages. And unlike what we saw in Ghana, here in this specific scenario, the authorities were in total support of this man getting his wishes granted. The children obtained the necessary permission and they went ahead with the burial. And I'm sure right now, Chief Sekende Piso is resting in perfect, satisfactory peace. I have a feeling his children may have also turned on the radio before putting him all the way to the ground. I don't know how bad the reception would be for a 6-foot grave to receive radio signals, but I'm sure by now the radio must have stopped playing. Now, let's come back to Nigeria, where you all said we don't do such a thing. When you all said, oh, Azubike is crazy for wanting to bury his father in a BMW car. That is nuts. We don't do such. Well, you see, 2018 was a totally different time, and I think maybe that story set precedence to what eventually would happen 3 years later in 2021, where a native doctor named Chief Simon Udu, who had 59 wives and over 300 children, was buried with his vehicle in Enugu State, Nigeria. Not exactly the same place where the initial story happened for Azubike, the fictional character who never really happened, but close enough. Chief Simon Odu's story is something that we have talked about in this channel on its own, so maybe I'll put a link somewhere around for you guys to go check it out in our YouTube page on True Crime Daniel. But just to cut the long story short, unlike the other ones, Chief Simon wasn't buried in his vehicle, he was buried with his vehicle. Or was it one of the vehicles his children bought for him? Maybe his own vehicle. So said his coffin was placed on top of his vehicle and he wasn't exactly inside the vehicle like we saw in the other scenarios. A massive grave was dug wide enough to accommodate his vehicle, and the vehicle was placed first inside of it and his casket was put on top of it. And the interesting thing about this one was that the engine was left running. I don't know why that was the case. I don't know if they took permission for this. I don't think the government really cared. It just happened, and according to sources, it actually happened the same day he died, which meant they most likely did not take permission. But then again, that was their land. So you see, that was one of the good things about having your own land and burying your loved ones there. You could literally bury them in a house if you wanted to. Chief Simon Odo was 74 at the time of his death, and he was buried on the 14th of December 2021. Okay, now before you all come for Africa, because we just did 3 stories where it was mostly Africans who did this car burial thing, you need to put in mind that this is a practice in a lot of places, especially even in the USA, and it has been happening for years. A 37-year-old lady named Sandra, who died in 1977, also made a similar request for when she died, that she should be buried in a 1964 Ferrari dressed in a nightgown close to her husband's grave. And that happened. In fact, right up to this moment, it's been said that her gravesite is a tourist attraction. Interesting. But in her defense, she came from a very wealthy home. She lived a very social life. She was like a big personality in the Hollywood scene back in the day, even though she wasn't an actress. But she just had a rich husband who came from wealth and oil. So I can see her being buried in a car, in a nightgown, in the front seat, next to her husband's grave, who was buried in just a coffin. Ooh. Another man in the USA named George, whose body was cremated into ashes in May of 1994, was also buried with his vehicle, a 1984 white Corvette. His ashes was placed in the front seat, and he had made this preparation long before he died. It was even said when he was alive, he bought 4 plots in a cemetery just so that it could accommodate his car, because he knew he wanted to be buried in it long before he died. Although it was said that it was hard for him to get approval, eventually when the government realized that this was one of his last wishes, they had no option than to grant it to him. but under the condition that all the mechanical stuff in the vehicle would be removed. Let's say the oil, the car battery, anything that could cause pollution to the soil, to the environment, was removed from the car. So he was basically just buried in plastic metal without the engine, I suppose. I don't know. More recently, even in China, a man was buried in a tunnel-like grave in his vehicle in Shanxi province, northwest of China in 2015. And his burial was very much attended, with people placing flowers over the grave and on the vehicle. Even all the way to India, a man who was a farmer and also a mechanic requested to be buried in his vehicle. It was his favorite thing in the world, well, given the fact that he was a mechanic. His grave was dug with a large excavator to fit in his vehicle. The car was said to be decorated and his body was placed in it before it was eventually buried. You see, so this is, although a weird practice, but it seems like a lot of people have done it in the past, and it also appears that more people would be doing it. In fact, there was even another story that happened 3 years before 2018. That should have been 2015, where it was said an Enugu man also buried his father in a jeep. Because this story is also referenced whenever they are talking about Azubike's story that turned out to not be true. But whenever you read up on Azubike's story burying his father in a BMW worth 33 million naira, every article also go back in 2015, where a man was said to have equally buried his mother in a jeep in Enugu State. That one I would believe, given the fact that Simon Odo was also from Enugu and also requested to be buried in his vehicle. But it's hard to tell if that other one is true. So guys, this is a list of a group of people who have been buried in their vehicle. Answer me this one question. If a loved one you know so much requested that they be buried in their vehicle or in a vehicle, would you grant them that wish despite the fact that you think it's ridiculous? Or would you go ahead and bury them the way you think they should be buried? Let me know your thoughts and your answers in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.